Hello mate, welcome back. In this video we're going to look at how to create avatars or side images for a Ren'Py game or for any other purpose really. Before I get started, a huge thank you to everyone for subscribing and hitting that notification icon. That really helps me out. And of course an even bigger thank you to my members and patrons. Your names will be running across the bottom of the screen at the end of the video. Incidentally, if you are interested in supporting the channel, you can visit the Patreon in the description down below, or you can just join the channel and become a member by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button. So let's jump into this then. As you can see, I've already got one set up here, a shot set up, but I'm going to set this up again and I'm going to talk you through how I do it. So before I do anything else, I'm going to come into my perspective view. I'm going to jump into smooth shaded mode just to speed things up a bit, and I'm going to reset my camera. So the first thing you need to do is get your character loaded into the scene, and I generally would leave them in the A pose or the T pose for this kind of shot. However, just for a little bit of a different flavor, what I've done here is I've actually added the pose to the character and some clothes. Again, if I were doing this for a Ren'Py game, I probably wouldn't bother with clothes simply because you're only really going to be seeing them from the top of the shoulders up. And having clothes is neither here nor there. It's just going to slow your render down, being completely honest. So once you've loaded in your character and you've got them into your A pose or whatever pose you want them to be in, and then you've got yourself set up, the next thing you need to do is add your camera in. So I'm going to create a new camera by hitting this button in the top left hand corner here, and then a new dialog box will appear eventually, asking you what properties you want your camera to have. And the name and the label, assuming you haven't got 1,000,001 cameras in your scene, will automatically be set up like this, so we don't need to worry about this. Now, generally speaking, if you watch my videos, you will see me creating using the apply active viewport transforms, but in this case we're just going to leave apply default settings checked. And the reason we're doing that is because we're going to manually input the properties that we need our camera to have. So we'll just hit accept there, and then lo and behold, you will see camera 2 appear in our scene navigation tab. So what we're going to do before we do anything else is we're going to set the X position to 0. Then we're going to set our Y position to probably about 150. We can tweak that later. The Z translate I'm going to set to 1500. X rotate to 0. Y rotate to 0. And then Z rotate to 0 as well. So the only numbers that should have any white on them is the Y translate and the Z translate. So now if we jump into that camera, you can see we're a freaking long way away from the character, and that is great because what it means is that there will be minimal distortion to the character's features. If you're too close in, then you will see there's going to be some distortion. You'll see a big nose and so on and so forth. I've actually got a video on that very topic, so feel free to have a browse through my Daz Studio playlist and you'll see an explanation as to why we have the camera far away and zoom in rather than having the camera close to the character. Obviously that doesn't always work in, for example, interior scenes where you've got walls. You can't necessarily do that, but in this case we don't have any obstructions between ourselves and the character, so we can get as far away as we want. Anything over 4 or 5 meters, to be honest, you're not going to notice that many results, but because I've got all the space in the world, I might as well go further away. So I've gone 15 meters away. Now what we want to do is, with our camera selected, go into the camera properties and increase the focal length until we are close in on what will eventually be the character's face and not her chest. So we can just use the Y translate to bring this up. And what we want is this kind of shot here where the character's head would fit inside a square and the face or the head is the main feature. Now what we can do is we can use our, I can get Daz Studio to pay attention. We can drag our render settings in here and we can actually change our render settings so that we are going to be a square just simply by clicking on this and going square one by one. And then we can change our size. For the purposes of the game I'm creating in Ren'Py, my side images need to be 150 by 150, so we can set that up and then drag that off the screen like that. Now what we want to do is just make sure that the head is nice and central. Notice that I am ever so slightly off here. Now you can move the character or the camera. The camera is probably going to be a little quicker, but for the purposes of not messing the camera up, I'm actually going to move the character, and that's because any other character that I load into the scene is going to be dead central. So I just need to move her across a smidge until she's basically bang in the middle, like so. And then we can jump into our NVIDIA Iray preview mode and we can see what our shot is going to look like. Now, I would highly advise not using the default HDRI for this, because your characters are going to be really heavily lit on one side and not heavily lit at all on the other side. As you can see, I found, or rather in this case, created an HDRI which is very balanced on both sides of the image. Now, I will include a download in the description below for this HDRI map so that you can use it if you so choose. It's one I've created myself, so you know, use it as you need to. So now we've got this set up, we just basically need to push out this render. If we're using still images for this character's side image, all we have to do is hit the render button and save it as a PNG, and then that's good to go. I want to go one step further, and I'm actually going to animate this character so that she looks a little bit more alive. So what I need to do is, before anything else, I actually need to select her eyeballs, and I need to make sure that they are continuously pointed at camera 2. And I'll do that with the left eye and the right eye. And that's because if the head moves, we want to make sure that the character maintains a lock, or maintains eye contact with the camera, because if I don't do that, her eyes are just going to follow whichever direction her head is facing in, which is always going to look kind of weird in our animated thing. So I'm going to jump back into my texture shaded or my smooth shaded mode, and I'm going to expand the timeline here using Animate 2. What I need to do is go into my timeline, and I need to set the number of frames per second. Now, my animation film strip file is going to contain 32 frames. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to set this up to be 32 frames. And we're going to make sure that the total number is 32. We don't want 33 frames. There's a reason for that, is that we need an even number to create our film strip file. Otherwise, things are going to go all kinds of bonkers. So we've got our frames per second set up, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to set this up so that the animation runs slower than the animation in the Animate 2 file. So the first thing we need to do is load in an Aniblock, which is going to make the character's head animate. Generally speaking, you want something like a breathing simulation. You don't really want massive changes of facial expressions, because when it loops, it's going to look weird. You need something nice and simple, so go through your Aniblocks and find something that will allow you to... You have to make sure you've got your character selected as well, otherwise you're not going to be able to see Aniblocks. There we go. So I've got a couple that I'm going to load into my Animate 2 timeline. I'm just going to expand that there. Doesn't really matter too much, but bear in mind that when you're browsing your animations, this kind of thing is going to happen. Your character is going to start previewing the animations that you've hovered over, which can be quite irritating, but unfortunately it's just the nature of the beast. So I'm just going to choose my animation file. Going to load that one into there. So we've got 1 second animation. I want this animation to last maybe 2 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the number of frames so that when I compress that file into the Ren'Py file, it's 32 seconds is actually going to last more like 2 seconds. Now, I don't actually do that in Daz Studio, I do that in Ren'Py. I've got 32 seconds worth of animation, and then I can stretch out how long that lasts once I get into Ren'Py. But basically what we've got here is a really basic animation. If I just run this, you can see that basically it's just breathing. It's a simple one breath. And as you say, if you try to breathe every second, it's going to make you feel very lightheaded and it's going to look kind of weird. So that's why we're going to spread this out in Ren'Py. But we can basically now run this animation, and so we're going to go into our render settings because this is where we need to do a little bit of tweaking. First thing we need to do is change to an image series, and we need to make sure that the frames are set up correctly from 0 to 31. That's cool. And then we're going to create a base name for our animation. In this case, it's just going to be like mum_neutral because she doesn't have a facial expression in this. It's just kind of like she's staring at the camera, which is fine. And then we can change the name of this file to whatever we want it to be. I'm just going to move it into a different folder. So we got that, and I can create a new folder, which is just going to be like that, and give it double click on that. And then once we've got our folder selected, you can see it's going to create our animation files there. Next thing we need to do is just go through our settings and make sure we get everything set up. Render mode, we don't need to make any changes. Progressive rendering is where we're going to make our first change. First thing we're going to do is turn off rendering quality enable, and we're going to set our max samples, and I'm going to go with, because this is a very small file, I'm going to say 500 is going to be our maximum. Time we don't need to worry about. Honestly, if a 500 iterations takes longer than 7,200 seconds, truthfully there's something wrong. Alpha we don't need to play with. Optimization we don't need to play with, except to change instancing optimization to speed if you are getting dark rings in the eyes. You don't want to have to Photoshop out dark rings from the eyes for 32 frames because that will be a massive pain in the bum. Next thing we're going to do is go into filtering. We can leave our Firefly filter enabled, switch to on, leave your bloom filter set to off, and then this is something that you'll almost never hear me say. Turn your post denoiser on, post denoiser enable on, and then what you're going to do is change the start iteration to 475. So this is not going to kick in until the absolute very last frame of our animation. To be honest, you probably don't even need to use the post denoiser. However, just in case, we've switched it on. Spectral rendering is fine, section object is fine, tone mapping is fine, and environment is fine because we've already checked all of those things in our NVIDIA iRay preview. So what we can do now is drag this bad boy back over out the way, and then we can set this render running, and away it will go. And then as you can see, after it's run through that process, we get our 31 or 32 frames starting at 0, ending at 31. And then what I will do in Photoshop is I will turn these into a contact sheet, i.e. I'll put them in a 4 wide grid, 4x8 grid, which will then allow me to use film strip animation in Ren'Py. However, that's really all there is to it, guys. It's more about setting up the lighting and the camera than anything else. Once you've done that, all you have to do is you can potentially choose another character, load it in, line up the nose and the eyes to make sure that they're in the same place, hide the character that you've currently got, and then you can just rinse and repeat and use this for as many different poses and expressions as you need. Thanks very much for watching that, guys. I hope you found that useful. Don't forget the HDRI in the description down below, and I will see you in the next one. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye bye.